Up here, I'm going to let you. You got a lot of catching up to do with all these folks. Let everybody know a little bit about yourself and this great Secretary of State's race that you're involved in.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you all for coming out in the middle of the day on a Monday. I appreciate that. I know you've given me a lot of grace to come out and say, here's my background and a little bit about this race. So thank you. It's good to see you. It's very good to be out here. Now, I appreciate what Randy said because this Secretary of State's race has never been more important than it is right now. Now, I'm thankful for what you've been able to do here in Vigo County, but you know the Democrats have previously focused on prosecutors' offices. A lot of money goes into prosecutors' offices. They know you can change the culture of a county, the culture of a city, you can change that office. But what we've seen is that they've pivoted to say if we can control the elections, if we can control the chief elections officer in Indiana, then we can control the state. And their goal is to never lose power. That is the Democrats' only goal. And this year, they think they've got a great shot, probably their best shot in the last 20 years to say, we can put up a statewide candidate that can win in Indiana. They're energized and they think they can do it. I do not want that to happen. I don't want that to happen here in Vigo County, like you mentioned. We want to make sure Republicans are up first and we have inspectors that are doing good work at the polling places. But I also don't want that to happen in Lake County. I don't want that to happen in St. Joe County because they are suffering right now under Democratic elections leadership. So I'm in this race to make sure we can win in the fall. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and then also priorities in this office, and then I think it's important for you to ask direct questions too. I think that's a major key here. So I'm a Christian. I've been married for almost 15 years. We have 4 kids. We homeschool our kids. Now, when I say we homeschool our kids, my wife does about 95% of that, and then I get the 5% when Miles is hard for this reading and it gets dumped over to me. So I do my part, but homeschool our kids. And I am one of 8 children growing up, and second oldest. What that means is that there's not a lot of money running around for education. So, starting at 14, I worked. I worked all through college. All of my first jobs were agriculture. It was detasseling corn, baling hay. And actually, the funny story about detasseling corn is, for anyone that's done that before, if you've done it for one season, they tricked you into it. But when you go back for a second season, like I did, then that's my fault. So I recognize that. But worked all through college. I went to IUPUI, got my degree downtown Indianapolis. That has since broken apart, so I was pretty convinced my kids thought I didn't actually have a degree since, Dad, sure, your school doesn't exist anymore. But then I went back and got my master's degree from the Naval War College as a civilian. I was sponsored at the Naval War College, and the emphasis there was strategic planning and how do you solve for major problems. And it was an excellent opportunity for me. So worked all through school, but for the last 2 decades, I've been very involved in Republican policy and politics to get our folks across the line. I've been a pusher for most of my career. How do we help other folks knock doors, raise money, get people across the finish line here in Indiana? Now, when I graduated, I worked for a small business. It was not politically related. I did all of that on my own time. I was an office manager on the north side of Indianapolis for an HVAC company. But when the Obama administration won in 2008, you guys remember that, the wave of quote-unquote hope and change that we saw go across the country, a lot of us, I believe, felt like, am I the last person standing that doesn't believe what we're seeing from this Obama administration? That am I crazy? Like I don't want any of that. And they're saying we have to have that. But I wasn't crazy. And what we saw was that the conservative movement, especially around the Tea Party, said, no, we're going to push back on that. We are sending folks to Washington to fight for good policy and to push back on the Obama administration. A lot of that was coming out of the Tea Party. And in 2010-11 wave, we saw a record number of Republicans go and flip the House. I think it was 94 or some Republicans that flipped the House. And while I was working for a non-political job, I told my boss, I'm hired. What I'm doing every night when I get off work or on the weekends, I have to go try and serve where these conservative folks are serving in Washington. So I went out, like I mentioned, not a whole lot of donation money from my dad. Nobody knew who I was in Washington, but I just had one goal, and it was to work hard and trust God and see where it goes. and I ended up working for the Committee on House Administration in Washington. The Committee on House Administration is the chief elections committee in the U.S. House. So constitutionally, both the Senate and the House administer their own elections. What that means is across the country, as these elections are being decided, the Committee on House Administration's responsibility is to view all of them, figure out where we may have challenges, and then train watchers, train recount votes, train administrators to then deploy into these elections and make sure that they're done appropriately, because constitutionally it is. So I was involved in that very directly with our elections attorneys. Now, I'm not an attorney, but we spent a lot of time working on it. I was trained myself as well to deploy these votes across the country, and I spent a lot of time on that. I then moved to leadership, and my role there was primarily pushing back on Nancy Pelosi's agenda. Now, I'll give one example here, because I think you guys will recognize where I'm going with this. When Republicans are in charge, so even at the State House, you get your priority bills. So you've got 1 through 10, we're in a short session 1 through 5, but you've got your priority bills. Same thing is true in Washington. When Republicans are in charge, we put forward things like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, or Energy Independence for the United States. When the Democrats are in charge, what do you think their H.R. 1 was? Does anybody remember Nancy Pelosi's H.R. 1, premier bill for her? It was the For the People Act. Of course, they always give them nice names, Save the Country Act, whatever it is. For the People Act, which was a federalization of elections. Because they know that if you can control the elections, then they can never lose power, and they'll control the country. They know that then, they know that here and now. Now, we were successful, we pushed back, she did not get that across the finish line, and I'm very thankful for that. After that, I had the opportunity to return home, which we're going back to God's country. I appreciate it. If you're ever in the bubble in Washington, you get to come back home where your family's at, it is a weight off of your chest. So we had an awesome opportunity to bring our 4 kids back home. We live in Cicero, Indiana. But I did run myself with a 50 restaurant streak. I was not successful in that venture. I came in 3rd out of 9. But I think the important part in this, and one of the reasons I bring it up, is because after the fact, the woman who won, Victoria Sparks, I came back and said, it's more important that we keep this seat in Republican hands than it is to hold any type of personal animosity. We came back together with her, endorsed her, pushed forward, and she's still in that seat now. She has actually come behind me now in this race and also endorsed me to say we're going to push forward together because it's important that this seat remains in conservative hands. So after that, I worked for Beck's Hybrids. If anybody knows the corn and soybean company, sometimes I say small business, that's false. It's a family-owned business here in Indiana that has done very well for themselves. But my role there was to build an agriculture education program where we could help our state house partners and our federal partners better understand the farm economy and agriculture policy. And then, most of you folks probably know this, but Senator Banks asked me to come onto his team and work for him here in Indiana. So I had the opportunity to travel the state for him as a senior advisor, and then also as his agriculture policy liaison. So I spent a lot of time doing that. What that means is that for the last 3 years, I have been on the road exclusively talking with Hoosiers to hear what's going well, what are we doing well as a state of people, where do we have issues that we can work on a policy level, and then importantly, where do we pull government out of your lives, which is most likely the answer, at least from what I've seen. So that's a little bit of background. I'm going to talk about priorities and then questions. So priority number 1 is to close our primaries. I don't think it's asking too much for our Republicans to vote in Republican primaries, for Democrats to vote in Democratic primaries, and then for those candidates to be put forward into the general and you vote on who the winner is. We have seen more than ever folks crossing over to influence elections from the Democratic side moving over to our Republican primaries. It can be done. There are 15 states with closed primaries, including Florida, and there's not depressed voting turnout there. There's also 16 states that have semi-closed primaries. We do it in the majority of states across the country. We can implement this well, and I'm committed to working with the Clerks Association as well to say, how do we do this well? How we implement it so it's not onerous, but it helps us protect our elections. The second one is to stop folks that are not here legally or that are non-citizens from voting in our elections. Right now, we're pretty good about auditing an election after the fact and saying, let's prosecute folks that voted illegally. However, that's not good enough for me to say, you've already meddled in the election, now we're going to come try and find you. We have to be proactive in our approach to stopping to ensuring only citizens are voting in our elections. Part of that is, when you get an ID, there needs to be a marker on that ID for folks when they bring in non-citizen documentation that they are applying for a driver's license. Either it says non-citizen on the driver's license, or there's a marker at the end, a specific letter to say this person is here legally, but they're not a citizen and they're not eligible to vote. So when they go into a polling place, it is very clear to the folks that are the inspector, I was an inspector in this last cycle, you have to be able to see that very closely. And then the last thing is to stop the business fraud that we've seen, specifically around these shell trucking companies or these chameleon carriers. If you've watched any of that in the news, these companies will create identical LLCs. They'll have their drivers drive inside of that LLC. They'll rack up a number of violations or issues. They're driving too long, pulling too heavy loads, bad CDLs, and then eventually when it becomes not tenable anymore, they'll discard that LLC, move their drivers over, and never see the repercussions of that action. In the Secretary of State's office, you can't solve the federal problem. There is a federal problem. But you can say, as the Business Registration Office, we're going to compile the data necessary, look for the anomalies, like 14 identical LLCs in one home address in Greenwood, and send that either to the AG's office or to local folks to further investigate and prosecute. That is the bare minimum. You have to be doing that right now, and I'm committed to doing that. Now, a couple of these things, the first two priorities, you have to work at the State House to get done, and I'll be brief here. But my background, it is the most well-rounded of anybody in this race, has elections experience, private business experience, filed my own small business, and legislative background to say how we take these priorities, champion them at the State House, work with our partners in the State House to build that coalition and get it across the finish line. Otherwise, we're just talking about it. I feel very confident in that. But undergirding all of this is the fact that we have to win in the fall. We have to make sure that this seat is held by Republicans. I have 4 kids, like I mentioned. I want to live here the rest of my life. I want them to choose to live in Indiana. And I want to make sure that we continue the strength that we have built here and not hand that over to the Democrats. So, I have a statewide infrastructure. I have support in fundraising and the ability to go toe-to-toe with somebody that the Democrats think is their #1 candidate. We have to match their energy, we have to bring our folks out, and we have to give confidence to Republicans that are going to pull the lever on election day to say, I don't need to split the ticket. I'm going to vote for Republicans, and all of our down ballot folks are going to be successful right along with that. So, 2 things can be true. How did we get here? 1, delegates came to me directly and said, would you consider running for this? And I said, at the time, no. Part of that is because I'm on a leave of absence now, but Senator Banks was my employer, and he had endorsed another candidate. So I have enough political sense, I think you guys too, that if you run ahead of where your own boss is, you're probably not going to be successful. But delegates kept coming to me from the grassroots level and saying, would you consider it? We do not have somebody that we can get behind and champion in this race to win in the fall as the most important piece of this. And then when the final straw dropped with the Chief of Staff for the Secretary of State being registered to vote illegally, Senator Banks came to me and said, I know folks are talking to you. If you are prepared, if you're ready to do this, and you have to really want it, because it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be fun. We've seen a lot of that recently. It's not easy or fun, but it doesn't matter because I want this seat to remain in our hands. And if I didn't believe that I was the candidate that could get us across the finish line in the fall, I wouldn't do this. I would do what I did the rest of my 20 years in this job, is to push other folks because they're going to do this well. But I believe that I'm the candidate that can take the infrastructure, the support, going toe-to-toe with Bo, and to actually win in the fall, which is the priority. So, I'm asking for your support at the convention. I would love your vote in less than a week on Saturday. I'd love the chance to continue talking about it. But I really think it's important to answer questions too, and so if there's anything that you want to bring up or throw out here, I'd love the chance. And I defer to Randy. Do I have time for questions? Is that okay? Okay.